Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and it has been a big week in crime. I have a feeling that you may have heard of the Delphi murder case, and more recently, that Richard Allen has been found guilty of the 2017 murders of Liberty German, who was 14, and Abigail Williams, who was only 13, both of Delphi, Indiana. This is the story of the murders as the public knows them and some of the news that came out of the court during the trial. And this trial was not televised, so it allowed for very little public observation in the courtroom. There is a lot to absorb in and around this case. It was a very polarizing case. People on social media, they were arguing left and right. There was just a lot of drama. And at the end of the day, two little girls are dead. And someone has been convicted by a jury of his peers to be legally responsible for this crime. This heinous and unspeakable crime, I might add. Let me give you a background about what happened the day that the girls were killed. It was February 13th, 2017, and Abby and Libby opted to spend their day off from school walking the historic Delphi trails, which is about 70 miles north of Indianapolis. And Delphi, Indiana is a very small town. The population is just shy of 3,000 people. The girls were dropped off by Libby's sister Kelsey, and they were supposed to be picked up a few hours later. When they didn't show up, that's when the family was nervous, and Libby wasn't answering her phone. Abby didn't have a phone, so Libby was really their only connection. The manhunt and the search began, and sadly, the next day, the girls' bodies were found less than 1 mile from the Monon High Bridge. And, trigger warning, their throats were slit and they were partially clothed. Now, Libby German's phone captured the suspect walking and possibly saying, "Guys, down the hill." And this was widely publicized nationwide. Not only did Libby take out her phone during the last moments of her life, she was probably terrified, but this young girl was smart enough to record the suspect. So we have a voice to work with, we have a figure to work with, and we were able to see the clothes that the figure was wearing. And this was crucial to the investigation and the conviction of Richard Allen. It was also later revealed in unsealed court documents that there was an unspent bullet in between the bodies of the two girls, and investigators searched Richard Allen's home in 2022 and seized a .40 caliber pistol. Prosecutors disclosed in the court documents, released several weeks after his arrest, that testing determined that the unspent bullet found between Abby and Libby had been cycled through Richard Allen's pistol. It took police 5 years to make an arrest. It took them until 2022 to arrest Richard Allen. And Richard Allen volunteered to police that he was there on the bridge that day that the girls were killed. He told them this himself. Richard Allen worked at a local CVS pharmacy, by the way, and it was a small town, so you can imagine that this small town was terrified for the 5 years that nobody was arrested. Just to backtrack, investigators did interview Richard Allen in 2017 because he told an officer he had been walking on the trail the day that Williams and German went missing and had seen, quote, 3 females at a bridge called the Freedom Bridge, but did not speak to them. And this is according to an affidavit. He also told this officer that as he walked from that bridge to the Monon High Bridge, he did not see anyone, but was distracted, quote, watching a stock ticker on his phone as he walked. Now, police decided to interview Richard Allen again on October 13th, 2022, when he said he had seen three, quote, juvenile girls during his walk in 2017. Investigators then searched his home within days, and this search led to the discovery of the .40 caliber pistol. And for the last 5 years before Richard Allen's arrest, there was the grainy image from Libby's phone of, quote, bridge guy. They were begging the public for answers. Have you seen this man? Do you know this man? It's important to note that there were technically other suspects that police were looking into as well before they were cleared and before they arrested Richard Allen, one of them being Brad Holder. So he was a paganist, or is a paganist that had a son that was quote unquote dating Abby. And that's a bit speculatory. I'm sure they weren't dating. They were very young. They were just hanging out. But Brad Holder had some social media posts seemingly taunting the police to investigate him. He was posting about the murders and almost mimicking the images of the way that Abby and Libby's body were found at the crime scene. And at this point, the crime scene was unreleased. So a lot of people were wondering, well, how did he know? But police did clear Brad Holder. But the defense had said, this is your guy, this is your guy. And I'll also get into why they said that. It has something to do with Odinism, but yes, that is coming later. And there was also another suspect named Elvis Fields. Elvis Fields also claimed that he was on the bridge that day, but he was considered to be borderline incoherent, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. And then there was another man named Keegan Kline, who was just a total creep and was attempting to communicate with young girls on Snapchat and social media. And it was revealed that one of the young girls that he had contacted was Libby German. So in August of 2020, Kline was charged with 30 felonies, including possession of child porn, child exploitation, obstruction of justice, child solicitation, and synthetic identity deception. This is according to online court records. However, he did not kill Abby and Libby. While Richard was awaiting trial, and again, Richard worked at CVS, and he was married to his high school sweetheart, his childhood sweetheart, and they also have a grown daughter. And while awaiting this trial, his defense team experienced a very large evidence leak. Richard Allen's defense attorney is Andrew Baldwin, and Michael Westerman, who was one of Andrew Baldwin's associates, was charged with one count of conversion, which is a Class A misdemeanor, after admitting in a sworn statement to local police that he was responsible for a large evidence leak related to Abby and Libby's murder. Now, what was this evidence leak? Well, it was bad. He took photos at the crime scene, and he leaked these photos to a YouTuber. This leak caused Judge Gull to remove Baldwin and his co-counsel Brad Rossi from the case, and they were later reinstated. But this was crazy. In October of 2024, the misdemeanor charge was dismissed. What the photos revealed to the public is that there were sticks placed around the girls' bodies. Now, this led to the defense theory, and this goes back to Brad Holder, the defense's theory of Odinism being introduced. Odinism is a form of paganism or witchcraft, and the defense claims that the evidence at the crime scene supported Odinist practices. This includes the stick formation on the girl's body And per the defense, they allege that some of the branches had been pre-cut with a power saw, suggesting that they were prepared before the killings. They also cited a pagan holiday on February 14th as well. Now, Judge Gull did not allow the defense to introduce this as their defense. Judge Gull basically said, cool, you got a bunch of sticks and maybe some blood and a date. That's not enough evidence to introduce this wild theory. And I've covered this case on my other show, Primetime Crime, on YouTube with Jarrett Ferrantino, who is a former homicide prosecutor. And Jarrett said, look, as a prosecutor, I'm fine allowing any type of defense entered, mainly because I don't want to give the defense any reason for any type of appeal. I will win this case regardless because the person is guilty. So I know that a lot of people who follow this trial closely were a bit up in arms about the fact that Odinism wasn't allowed in, as well as the fact that Odinism seemed to be related to Brad Holder, who was a loose potential suspect early on. Now, there has been a lot of reasonable doubt in this case, and I'm going to talk about that. I want to reiterate that there is no DNA evidence linking anyone to the murder of Abby and Libby. There was the bullet that was said to have cycled through Richard Allen's gun. But again, no DNA evidence. Now, what does that mean? A ghost did not murder Abby and Libby. So yes, it could very well be that Richard Allen was just that good, except for the bullet. The defense also had several witnesses who were in and around the area that day on the Delphi Trail. And when asked about quote-unquote bridge guy, their descriptions just appeared to be a bit all over the place, with some saying that bridge guy was over 6 feet tall, some saying that he was a handsome young guy with a great head of hair, and I think a lot of people were like, wait, were there 2 bridge guys? Because Richard Allen is about 5'4", 5'5", and he's bald. But in an audio recording that was of a phone call that Richard Allen made to his wife from prison, he said, quote, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." And prosecutors have said that Allen actually confessed over 60 times to the killings while in prison, to his wife, his mother, family members, the prison warden, the psychologist, other prison employees, and other inmates. And clearly, the jury was convinced of this. There has been speculation that the psychologist that treated Richard Allen in jail was not really a fair psychologist, as she was a true crime fan who knew all of the details about the case, and many people believe that she should have never been able to treat him. Additionally, something that I have not mentioned yet, but that's really important to note, is that Richard Allen spent 13 months in solitary confinement. I do not agree with that. That is definitely not constitutional, if you ask me. And the state believes that they were doing this for Richard Allen's own protection. So again, the defense argued that Richard Allen's confessions were because he was having a psychotic break. But I'll remind you, he confessed over 60 times. In an April 3rd, 2023 call to his wife, he said, "Honey, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." And his wife kept saying, no, don't say that, don't say that. And he kept saying, "I need you to know that I did this. I killed Abby and Libby." And what's also important to note, and I think that many people in law enforcement and the FBI and psychologists, Richard Allen during this time was able to provide a timeline to law enforcement. If you are having a psychotic break, you are not able to form a timeline coherently. The psychologist also testified that she thought that maybe Richard Allen was faking some of the mental health behaviors that he presented in prison, describing his behaviors as sometimes defiant rather than psychotic. But again, people have questioned this psychologist in particular. I just don't know what motivation she would have to lie. The jury ultimately took 19 hours to deliberate and find Richard Allen guilty. And many people believe that it was Richard Allen's own words, his confessions, as well as the video that really got the conviction. Richard Allen also shared details of the murders with law enforcement before they were public, details that only the murderer would know. So while I do agree that it was not right to keep this man in solitary confinement, and yeah, he probably did have bouts of mental issues, because who wouldn't when you're locked up by yourself all that time? But I am not aware of what exactly solitary confinement meant in this case. Was he in a cell 24 hours a day? Was he able to leave for an hour to talk to a psychologist? Was he able to leave to talk on the phone, to visit his lawyers? I don't know all the details. However, what I do know is, based on my research, it does seem like he did provide a confession with a timeline that wouldn't indicate that he admitted this during a psychotic break. But I also agree, there was a lot of reasonable doubt. There wasn't DNA evidence. It's really difficult. But ultimately, I do believe that the jury got it right. And the families of Libby and Abby, they deserve peace and they deserve justice. And I'm sure the family of Richard Allen is already planning their appeal here. I'm just not sure how successful that will be. But I guess we will wait and see. And I want to take a minute to remember the girls, because Abby and Libby were so special. Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother, described her as active, super smart, involved in sports, and had a ton of friends. But however, Abigail Williams was her best friend. These girls were inseparable. They went on vacations together. They had sleepovers any chance they could get. They played volleyball. They were in band together. And Libby had just turned 14 in December, just 2 months before she was killed. And Libby loved adventure. Her grandma said she wanted to try anything once. She also said that she was intelligent and she had so much reasoning power. She was logical and she loved crime shows. She told her grandmother, "I'm going to help you solve crimes." She wanted to make a difference. Well, it's pretty incredible that Libby was able to solve a crime. She was able to help solve her own murder and the murder of her best friend. And Abby, she was an only child. She was smart and reserved and quiet. She didn't talk to many people. She hung around with a pretty small group of friends, but she loved those friends. She took part in volleyball and band, and from all of the descriptions, it just seemed like Abby was so sweet, so shy, and so quiet. So I can imagine that during her last moments, she really relied on her best friend Libby, and that just, God, it breaks my heart. Thank you for listening to this heartbreaking episode. I know it was very top level, so if anyone who is a super sleuth is listening, you'll know that I did leave out a lot, because I think it would take about 4 hours to go through this case from start to finish. But if you like this podcast, don't forget to rate and subscribe on Apple or wherever you listen, and I'll be back next week with new episodes.